Hello everyone, this is AlezierChess here to help you to realize your potential. And today we're going to be looking at Schlechter versus Walter John. This was another game that was recommended to me by my friend and subscriber, David Sullivan. And Schlechter was someone who tied for the World Championship with Emanuel Lasker. He also won several tournaments in Monte Carlo and in Stockholm, as well as in Paris and other parts of Europe. Walter John came in second in a tournament behind Kurt von Bodeleben in 1902, and he also had wins against David Janowski, who also challenged Lasker for a World Championship title, as well as Siegbert Tarrasch, who was one of the first 5 Grandmasters. So let's get into it. We have d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to c3, and pawn to f5, transposing into a Dutch aiming to get a stonewall set up. Here we have knight to f3, pawn to c6, bishop to f4, bishop to d6, and now pawn to e3. Not caring about getting double pawns, because if we get this structure, then we're gripping the e5 square with both of these pawns and the knight, and we're able to apply frontal pressure to the e6 pawn after we can bring this rook here after we castle. So here we have knight to f6 from Walter John, we have bishop to d3, and we have queen c7. And now here Schlechter plays the best move, pawn to g3. Here he's not worried about getting his pawns doubled, because again, we're going to take away from the center, so this way we can have a safe place to put our king, and then we can bring the rook to apply pressure to the e6 pawn. So here we have castles by John, we have castles, we have knight to e4, diving into the center, and now we have queen to b3. Rook to c1 is another strong idea, and we'll come back to that at the end of the game when we go over our analysis. Here after queen to b3, we have king to h8, getting off of that diagonal. We have rook to c1 now, and we have bishop takes bishop to gain a tempo by capturing, because here white has a threat of pawn takes pawn, followed by knight takes pawn, or pawn takes pawn followed by knight to b5. So to get off of those ideas, bishop takes, pawn takes, and now queen f7. Here it would have been better to go to e7 immediately, because after queen f7 we have knight to e5. And now we gain a tempo on the queen, and she resets to e7 anyway. Now we have bishop takes knight, we have f takes, and we have pawn to f3, breaking the black pawn formation. And now we have pawn takes and rook c to e1. Now we're putting up pressure against the queen, so that if, say, black plays a careless move like a6, we have pawn takes, knight takes, pawn takes, and knight g6 check, picking up the black queen. So here we have queen c7, again moving the queen. Black has yet to even develop any of his queenside pieces besides the queen herself. And now queen to a3, threatening the rook on f8, and also mate. So king to g8 to defend, and now we have rook takes f3. Now knight to a6, pawn to b3. Now our queen can go backwards on this diagonal from a3 to c1 and relocate herself if necessary. We have queen to d8, we have pawn to c5, knight to c7, and queen b2. Now we can start pushing the queenside pawns to break open the queenside and the c6 square. We have bishop to d7, finally developing that piece and trying to connect our rooks. We have queen c2, queen e7, and now rook e to f1. Now Schlechter is going to aim at pushing the kingside pawns because these minor pieces are stuck over here and the queen's rook is not active yet either. So after rook a to e8, pawn to g4, bishop back to c8, so the bishop is not targeted, so this way the queen is free to move. We have rook to h3, threatening mate in 1, with queen takes h7, so that induces the move g6, and this bishop is sitting over here crying. He's stuck behind e6. He can't get out via d7 to e8 because of the rook. He also cannot get out to g6 or h5, which would be his typical desired locations in a Stonewall Dutch. But here that piece is just even worse than a pawn sitting there on c8. Now, John also has to worry about sacrifices with knight takes g6, h takes and queen takes, if the queen were to leave the 7th rank. So now we have pawn to b4, queen f6, yes, leaving the 7th rank, but still keeping an eye on g6, so this is acceptable. Rook h to f3, rook e7, and now pawn to a4, getting ready to break open the queen side with b5. But now Schlechter just controls all parts of the board. First he controlled the center, was controlling the dark squares, especially the e5 square. Then he controlled the king side and the queen side, and then he advanced on the king side, and now he continues with the queen side advance. And black is helpless because white is going to break in whenever he's fully ready and whenever he's mobilized all of his pieces to do so. So now we have a6 trying to slow down the advance. We have knight to d1 now, which is a star move. Now this knight is getting ready to relocate to h6 via knight e3, g5, knight 3 to g4, and h6. So rook to g7, knight e3, queen e7, g5, bishop to d7, knight 3 g4, bishop to e8, and now knight to h6 check. So how is Schlechter able to come to this realization of this plan? Well, he figured out, where would I like my knight to be? This is known as the dream technique, which was talked about by the late great Jeremy Silman, where you envision where you want your piece to be, and then you see whether or not you have enough time to get it there. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves is enough time, because here black can't do anything. And it's actually going to be more like 4 moves when you consider that g5 is coming with tempo in order to expedite knight 3 g4 and then knight h6 check is another tempo. So you also gain a move when you play knight to h6. So here knight d1, rook g7, knight e3, queen e7, g5, bishop d7, knight 3 g4, bishop e8, knight h6 check, king to h8. Now we have queen e2, queen to d8, knight e5 to g4, getting ready to put this knight on f6, bishop to d7, and here we play queen e5 first, because it's important not to just dive in, because if we do, black might sacrifice the exchange in order to try to break the bind. This should still be good for Schlechter, but why lose the positional grip? Queen e5 first, knight to e8, and now rook h3. Now we have queen c7 and knight to f6. And here we have queen takes queen, pawn f takes, e5, rook to e7, and now white doubles up on the F file with threats of knight takes bishop. So knight takes knight is played because even without taking it, you cannot, for example, allow knight takes d5, rook takes, e takes. Oh, I'm going to get my bishop out. Nope, you're going to get checkmated. So here, knight takes knight, rook takes, because again, you cannot move the rook because we'll get the same pattern, and you cannot go back because you just lose a rook, and again, we're going to get the same rook and knight checkmate pattern. So here, rook takes, e takes on f6, rook to e8, knight f7 check, king g8 only move, and now knight e5, threatening the bishop and threatening the check, picking up the rook and promoting. So rook to d8, king g2, king f8, h4, bishop to e8, king f3, bishop to f7, king f4. White has finally marched the king all the way up, and now the king is in optimal position, just like all of the other pieces earlier in the game. He got into optimal position before striking. Now he's free to move this knight if necessary so that the king can cross into e5 and potentially d6 later. Now after king to e8, we have rook to b1, and after king f8, b5, Walter Jean resigned, as it's impossible for him to stop the breakthrough, either winning the c6 pawn, winning the b7 pawn, or infiltrating on the 7th rank, picking up h7, or winning the light squared bishop, as well as further ideas that would lead to checkmate. So what did you guys think of this game? Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and also stick around now for some of our deep dive analysis. And by R, I mean mine and Stockfish, because in this game, there's a lot of possibilities, and here I had to tweak the computer a lot because I don't understand a lot of the moves that it suggested. I think that Schlechter played this game pretty much perfectly. According to the engine, he was basically winning since the move g3, because that's how bad black's position is due to the bad light squared bishop. And after castles, knight e4, queen b3 is perfectly fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. But here the computer likes rook to c1, and we're going to have a look at reams and reams of analysis. So here, my move was knight takes knight. And here the computer likes pawn takes in order to bring the pawn closer to the center and start attacking the center pawns, so that after knight to d7, which is the computer suggestion, we have c5, also the computer suggestion, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight to f6, c4, bishop to d7, rook e1, and here the computer likes b6, and after knight to e5, here I put in what happens after pawn takes. We have c takes d, e takes, rook takes, knight to e4, and rook c2, and the computer evaluates this as winning. It's almost +3 here due to the weakness on c6, the weakness on d5, and the weakness on f5 long term. Once c6 falls, this whole position is going to fall apart. Also here, we have queen to e7, afterwards c5, and here the computer just simply wants to take, and I forgot to insert that move because my analysis was what happens after bishop c7. And here the computer recommends h4. We have h6, knight to e2, which is a computer move. I didn't understand this move at first actually, but this move is designed so that after g5 we have h takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and king g2 so that we can take over the open h file. And sample ideas go queen to g7, rook h1, knight d7, queen c2. Here the computer wanted to play bishop to b1. Like, this move does not make any sense to me whatsoever. So if somebody can explain this, like, I want to turn on the computer again to see what it's giving so you guys can see. Like, it's changing now to, yep, bishop b1. I don't understand this whatsoever. But back to the analysis, queen c2 was an idea that I thought of because I wanted to double the rooks. This also works. f4 is impossible here due to pawn takes, bishop takes knight, pawn takes, queen takes, knight to f6 doesn't work due to queen e5, f takes, and rook h3. And now here, if you take here, we're going to get rook g3, and that just wins a piece after knight g4, queen takes, king takes, and rook takes knight, check. And so here, after knight g4, queen takes, king takes, rook takes g3, we have e5, and here you have to take with the pawn because knight takes runs into rook takes f2 with check. And here you would wish that your king was on g1 already so that you could play rook takes knight check and then pop the rook on f2, but check here equalizes the game for black, believe it or not. So now when we go back after knight e2, instead of g5, we have bishop takes, and because g5 doesn't work, now I understood why knight e2, so that we can have our knight take up residence on the f4 square. And now after queen f7, getting off of the fork on g6, we have knight to e5, and after queen to e8, we have bishop e2, getting ready to bring our bishop into h5, and now we have knight to d7. Here, after knight d7, bishop h5, queen e7, knight eg6, and in the case of queen to d8, we have knight takes e6. There's also here, after bishop e2, pawn to b6, pawn to b4, and on a5, c takes b6, a takes b4, and queen b3. And here, we don't give a damn about the fork on d2, because if black were to go for it, we take on b4, and after knight takes rook, we have bishop h5 hitting the queen, and after queen to d8, we have pawn to b7, forking the rook and the bishop, and if bishop takes, queen takes, now we're in like Flynn on the 7th rank. We're also hitting this rook. Like, the knight has nowhere good to go. c6 is going to fall. There's too many problems here. Such as if knight takes g3, knight takes e6, we're threatening the queen, we're threatening the rook, and we're threatening a mate on g7. So with the rook hanging, the knight hanging, and the e6 pawn hanging, black is totally busted. So now if we go back to if b7, rook a7, we have pawn takes bishop queen, queen takes, and then king takes knight, And here you're up 2 pieces for the rook. And in the event of rook takes a2, we have queen e7, again infiltrating to the 7th rank. And if queen to d8, queen takes e6 is check, and it's surely going to be mate soon or catastrophic loss of material. We also have, instead of rook takes a2, the move g5 here, and this doesn't work for a very pretty reason, which is knight f to g6. And now the rook is hit by the queen and the knight. We have rook to e8, and now we have pawn to a4, running little Johnny down the board to get his promotion. Now we have queen to a6 check, king to g2, and now after queen takes a4, we have the brilliant knight to e7. Why is this brilliant? Because if rook takes this knight, queen takes knight, with check. If this rook takes the knight, the black queen hangs. And if you run away, for example, king g7, you run into knight takes on f5 with a check, pawn takes knight, and now queen to d6. And the rook is hanging to the bishop, which was discovered when we had knight e7, and then knight takes f5 as check. This is hanging. The g6 square is hanging. h6 is going to fall. We're going to have 3 pieces in the attack on the black king, and that's going to lead to mate or catastrophic loss of material. Now, if we go to move 14 in the game, there's absolutely nothing wrong with bishop takes knight. In fact, it's a very forcing move. But the computer here, for whatever reason, liked rook to c2. So I took a look at some lines here. Again, I looked at knight takes knight. And again, we're going to have pawn takes. And if knight to d7, we could have knight to f3, backing up to keep these pieces on the board. Knight to f6, rook e1, and if knight e4, knight e5, and say if queen to d8, we have h4 to grip the g5 square. We have queen b6, trying to trade queens. And now the computer suggests bishop takes knight. And after f takes rook b2, you can play queen takes queen, and then a takes b3. And if d takes, taking away from the center, we can play b takes c4. And here, white is much, much better. This is actually winning according to the engine. e4 is going to fall. And you cannot run the a5 pawn down the board because of c5, preventing the pawn from getting connected to its brother. And the pawns can no longer hold hands and protect each other. Instead, we're going to have a double up on the a file, and the a pawn is going to fall. And this light squared bishop can't get developed without en passant happening. This position is a total mess for black. So without the ability to run the a pawn, black has nothing in this position whatsoever. Also, here we have more long lines. After rook c2, the computer suggests knight d7. Now we have knight e2, knight df6, c5, and now after this, like it was a mix of my moves and the engine's moves. Knight to d7, f3, knight ef6. Here, knight takes knight, f takes, knight g5, h4, knight f7, queen to c3. And here, g5 was my idea. The computer, I forgot what it wanted to play here. But after g5, which is the only human move, the only idea to try to gain some activity, we have h takes, knight to f4. Now this is setting up a shot on g6 after rook h2, bishop d7, rook h2. Now we have knight g6 threat incoming, bishop to e8 to guard that threat, king to f2 to protect f3 so that we can double up rooks, pawn to b6, Rook c1, in case black wants to take, we'll take back and keep the c file opened. Now rook b8, pawn to b3 to prophylactically defend the second rank against black opening up. Now after rook b8, rook h6, rook g7, we have the double up finally, rook b7, and here the computer likes bishop to a6. This move is both brilliant and disgusting, as we're going to see later. We have rook b8, b4, and in the event of b5, shutting in this bishop is not going to stay shut in forever. Here, queen d2, relocating, king g8, king to e3 to open up the second rank for the queen to operate, bishop g6, queen h2, king f7, queen h4, and after rook to f8, we have the idea as to why this bishop got itself stuck in over here, and that's bishop to b7, just threatening to win the c6 pawn, creating a protected pass pawn in black's half of the board. Excuse me. So here, if queen takes bishop, queen takes knight, queen e7, we can swap out queens and play a4 as a pawn sacrifice to open up lines. And after pawn takes, rook a1, bishop to e8, rook takes a4, rook takes g3, which was my move. Here, I forgot what the computer wanted to play, but it wasn't going to change anything. This position is already +4. Rook takes g3 is the most human approach, which runs into rook takes a7, bishop d7, and now the very nice pawn to b5. Here, we're going to take on c6, and if he takes on b5, we're going to push c6. After rook to f7 to guard the hanging h7 pawn, we have pawn takes, and therefore this is just totally lost. There's not even much of a point in continuing the line, but I'll show you guys like a sample way of finishing the game because it's pretty. We have the check, and here we're going to have potential discoveries with the knight if you take, such as knight c5, picking up the rook, king takes, pawn takes, and now rook to g8. And yes, we could simply queen here, but knight to c5 also works. f4 check, king d3, and now the e pawn is also going to promote. Here on move 16, if we played, again, a wasteful move like a6, takes, knight takes, and knight g6 check. And here on move 38, if instead of queen takes queen, we have bishop to c8 trying to hold the fort, which was one of my ideas. After rook f to f3, which is stockfish, I was actually thinking rook h to f3, but this is better. We have queen takes queen, f takes, knight to c7, king g2, a5, pawn takes, knight to a6, and rook to b3, stopping any knight b4 ideas. Rook c7, rook h f3, rook e7, rook to f2, rook c7, rook bf3, and here king g7, which was my idea, just straight up loses to knight h5 check. I missed this move, but it picks up the exchange. And here after rook g7, pawn to h4, knight b4, knight takes d5, just straight up wins due to rook takes rook, rook takes, and now we're setting up for mate in 2. We're also hitting this knight on b4, so you can't defend everything. And in the event of rook f5, here we have the simple knight takes knight, which wins the game on the spot. Also here on move 40, if instead of knight takes f6, we had bishop to c8. Here we have knight takes on d5 again, hitting this rook and this rook. And again, going for that mating idea with rook f8 check and then rook g8. And here's something interesting. In this position, the computer doesn't even recommend taking the knight, even though this is +4. It's the most human, natural move, and it just completely wins. But the computer recommended two quote-unquote interesting ideas by its evaluation. One being king g2 and the other being pawn to h4. So after pawn to h4, rook f7 or rook ef7, now it recommends pawn takes, and this rook can't move anywhere. And I don't know what the computer's thinking, but I decided to input e5 to at least try to free up this bishop finally. And after pawn takes, bishop to e6, can you try to fortress here? Absolutely not, because of knight takes rook. Rook takes, and now b5, again breaking open the queen side or creating a second front, so this way we can get these passed pawns down the board. We have pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, and rook a3. It's better to take over the a file with this rook so that we can leave this one behind to stop the pawns if need be. Rook f8. Now this one goes to b1 to attack the b pawn. Bishop to d7, rook a7, bishop c6. In the event of rook to b8, we would just have a double up, forcing a trade, like so. After rook h8, king to e6, rook takes. Here we can't take on e5 because f7 will just promote on the next move. b4, rook e7 check, king f5, rook takes bishop, king e6, rook takes b7, and the b pawn and the d pawn are going to be goners. King takes e5, this runs into f7. And in the event of bishop c6, we have pawn to e6, and this is totally lost. So what did you guys think of this game and the analysis? I know it was a long one. I know that there were a lot of very, very long lines. However, it's a position that didn't have that many direct tactics or more long-term strategic planning, which is why I actually prefer Schlechter's approach when we go back to move 14, I believe it was. Yes, move 14 with bishop takes knight. This was just way more direct and to the point, as after f takes, f3, here white is threatening pawn takes pawn, and then knight takes e4, winning a pawn and centralizing both of these knights, making this move practically forced. And now after rook c to e1, again we have that threat to take twice on d5 and then check on g6. So after queen c7 and queen a3, king g8, rook takes on f3, here white is just positionally winning. And it's only 18 moves into the game. So hopefully this is an antidote for any problems you may face against the Stonewall Dutch. I know that I really hate playing against the Dutch, so I'm going to use this game as a template myself on how to defeat it. Thanks again to David Sullivan for making me aware of this game, and I hope that everybody enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'm trying to say everything at once. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Keep getting better every day, guys, and peace.